There is something almost sacred about an American grocery store. For generations, it has been far more than a place to buy food. It is where childhood memories quietly wait beside familiar labels. It is where family traditions are patiently passed from one generation to the next. Entire lives have unfolded beneath fluorescent lights and between carefully arranged shelves. We trust what we find there because we always have. After all, how much danger could possibly hide behind something as ordinary as a shopping cart and a weekly grocery list? And perhaps that is precisely why some of life's greatest hidden truths have remained hidden for so long. Millions of Americans walk through grocery stores every single week, believing they are making thoughtful, informed choices. We compare prices, we read labels, we choose what feels wholesome, traditional, or convenient. Yet remarkably few people ever stop to ask one fascinating question: who taught us to trust what we see on those shelves in the first place? For decades, ordinary Americans have faithfully brought familiar products into their homes without ever questioning the extraordinary stories quietly hidden behind them. Certain foods became symbols of health, others became symbols of comfort, convenience, or modern living. Entire generations grew up believing particular labels meant one thing, while time would eventually reveal something far more fascinating hiding beneath the surface. History tells us that some of humanity's greatest misconceptions survived not because they were outrageous or unbelievable, but because they felt perfectly ordinary. The most persuasive stories have never been the loudest ones. More often, they quietly accompany us through everyday life until we eventually stop recognizing them as stories altogether. And nowhere is that more remarkable than inside the modern grocery store. Have you ever wondered why some products always seem to occupy the most valuable space on the shelf? Why certain words instantly make us feel healthier before we've even read the ingredients? Why foods that appear almost identical somehow leave us believing one is unquestionably superior to another? Or why some of America's most beloved grocery traditions quietly survived for generations without ever inviting meaningful questions at all? Curiously enough, the answers are seldom found where most people think to look. Throughout the decades, grocery stores have transformed alongside America itself. What was once a simple marketplace patiently became something infinitely more sophisticated. A world of carefully designed choices, familiar symbols, and beautifully ordinary assumptions faithfully carried across generations. Somewhere between nostalgic advertising campaigns, comforting family traditions, and modern conveniences, patiently waiting within every aisle, millions of people quietly learned to trust things they were never taught to question. The extraordinary truth is that human beings have always been wonderfully predictable. We trust what feels familiar. We believe what sounds reasonable. We faithfully return to the things that once made sense yesterday. There is nothing unusual about that. It is simply part of what makes us human. Yet history repeatedly reminds us that familiarity occasionally conceals hidden truths of its own. The revelations waiting throughout this documentary are not stories of conspiracy or fear. They are stories of curiosity. They invite us to look once more at the ordinary things we stopped noticing long ago. Some will reveal fascinating truths hiding within America's oldest grocery traditions. Others will quietly challenge assumptions millions continue carrying through supermarket aisles every single week. And a few may fundamentally change how you look at certain shelves forever. Some of these hidden truths have patiently waited for decades. Others emerged only after generations of unquestioning trust. Yet all of them share something extraordinary in common. They were hiding in plain sight all along. By the time we reach number 1, you may discover that the greatest grocery store lie was never about any single product patiently waiting upon a shelf. It is something far more remarkable than that. Because number 42 is not our most fascinating revelation. Neither is number 20, nor even number 10. The hidden truth, waiting patiently at number 1, challenges one of the oldest assumptions Americans continue carrying with them every time they walk through those familiar automatic doors. The remarkable thing about grocery stores has never been what they sell. It has always been the extraordinary stories quietly accompanying the things we choose to bring home. And perhaps that is why curiosity remains among humanity's greatest lifelong companions. Ordinary places frequently conceal extraordinary truths. Familiar traditions occasionally reveal remarkable dimensions previously hidden in plain sight. The things we understand most confidently are sometimes the very things most deserving of another thoughtful question. Because somewhere between the brightly colored labels, nostalgic memories, and beautifully ordinary routines faithfully accompanying us throughout the decades, 42 hidden truths have been patiently waiting for us to finally notice them. And our journey is only just beginning. Few Americans realize that some of the most persuasive lies were never spoken aloud at all. They were quietly printed on labels, carefully arranged upon shelves, and faithfully repeated across generations until familiarity itself became their greatest disguise. At number 42 lies one of the grocery store's oldest illusions, the belief that eye-level products are naturally the best choice. For decades, shoppers have instinctively reached for whatever patiently waits directly before them, without ever asking why it occupies such valuable space in the first place. Yet grocery shelves have always been carefully designed stories rather than random arrangements. Sometimes, the most fascinating discoveries quietly wait a few inches higher or lower than where our eyes naturally wander. And speaking of what immediately captures our attention, number 41 reveals the remarkable power of color itself. Americans have long associated certain colors with freshness, health, and tradition. Deep greens quietly whisper nature. Gold suggests something premium and timeless. Bright whites promise purity and simplicity. Long before we ever read a label, our minds have frequently begun telling us a beautiful story about what patiently rests inside the package. Curiously enough, some of our strongest grocery store decisions are occasionally made before we've consciously realized we have made them at all. At number 40 waits the hidden truth behind the word premium. Throughout modern history, Americans have faithfully admired products that sound exclusive or superior. Premium coffee, premium bread, premium ingredients. Yet remarkably few grocery store terms possess as much persuasive power while revealing so little by themselves. Sometimes, a familiar word quietly sells an extraordinary feeling rather than describing an extraordinary difference. Yet perhaps even more fascinating is number 39, the belief that expensive automatically means healthier. Human beings have always associated value with sacrifice. If something costs more, surely it must offer more in return. Grocery stores understand this beautifully. Previous generations certainly paid premiums for genuinely rare ingredients or extraordinary craftsmanship. Today, however, price occasionally tells stories entirely separate from nutritional value altogether. History quietly reminds us that simplicity has frequently accompanied some of life's greatest treasures. At number 38 lies our remarkable trust in nostalgic packaging. There is something profoundly comforting about labels that appear unchanged across decades. Vintage illustrations patiently remind us of childhood kitchens and familiar Sunday mornings. Curiously enough, nostalgia itself has always been among humanity's most persuasive companions. Grocery stores occasionally sell cherished memories just as beautifully as they sell products. And perhaps that is why familiar traditions remain so extraordinarily valuable. The next revelation patiently waits beside one of America's favorite assumptions. Number 37 is the belief that fewer ingredients always means a better product. While simplicity frequently possesses undeniable beauty, history has always resisted becoming quite so simple itself. Human beings naturally seek easy answers to life's complicated questions. Grocery shopping is no exception. Sometimes, extraordinary foods contain surprisingly ordinary ingredient lists. At other times, remarkably simple labels quietly conceal fascinating stories of their own. curiosity has always remained infinitely more valuable than assumptions alone. And speaking of assumptions, number 36 quietly reveals how powerfully grocery stores influence the passage of time itself. Few people ever realize how deliberately ordinary shopping experiences have been designed to feel unhurried. Comfortable temperatures, familiar music, and beautifully organized displays patiently invite us to remain just a little longer than originally intended. The modern grocery store has never merely been a marketplace. It quietly became one of America's most carefully crafted experiences. At number 35 waits the hidden truth behind limited-time labels. Human beings have always feared missing extraordinary opportunities. Seasonal, special edition, available for a limited time. These beautifully ordinary phrases patiently transform curiosity into urgency. Previous generations certainly celebrated seasonal treasures worthy of anticipation. Yet occasionally, scarcity itself becomes part of the remarkable story, patiently being sold alongside the product altogether. The revelations become increasingly fascinating at number 34. The belief that larger packages always represent greater value. Americans faithfully admire practicality and thoughtful decisions. Buying more while spending less feels wonderfully satisfying. Yet grocery stores have quietly understood something about human nature for generations. We frequently compare prices less carefully when presented with extraordinary quantities. Sometimes the smallest numbers printed upon familiar labels patiently tell the most remarkable stories. At number 33 lies one of humanity's oldest habits: shopping while hungry. Curiously enough, this hidden truth reveals infinitely more about ourselves than it does about grocery stores altogether. Hunger possesses extraordinary persuasive abilities. Ordinary treats suddenly become irresistible companions, patiently waiting beside familiar aisles. Throughout history, human beings have rarely made their most thoughtful decisions while longing for immediate comfort. Grocery stores merely understand what humanity has always known about itself, and if our appetites occasionally influence our decisions more profoundly than we imagine, number 32 reveals something equally remarkable: the extraordinary power of placement itself. Why are certain products patiently waiting beside checkout counters? Why do others quietly accompany us throughout nearly every aisle? History teaches us that convenience remains among humanity's greatest desires. The easier something becomes to choose, the more naturally we frequently welcome it into our ordinary routines. The next hidden truth patiently accompanies millions of American families every single week. At number 31 is the belief that children's products are fundamentally different simply because they appear upon separate shelves. Bright illustrations, familiar characters, and beautifully playful designs quietly tell extraordinary stories of their own. For generations, Americans have faithfully associated childhood with innocence, comfort, and thoughtful care. Yet perhaps one of the grocery store's most fascinating abilities has always been understanding that human beings frequently purchase emotions just as readily as products themselves. At number 30 lies our remarkable trust in front labels over quiet details waiting elsewhere. Natural, traditional, farm fresh. Throughout the decades, beautifully familiar words have faithfully accompanied countless grocery decisions. Yet history has always rewarded curiosity over assumptions. Sometimes, the most fascinating truths quietly wait upon the parts of a package we glance at least frequently. And finally, we arrive at number 29, the greatest hidden truth of this chapter. It is the remarkably common habit of believing that grocery stores merely respond to our choices rather than quietly shaping them alongside us. Human beings naturally imagine ourselves as entirely independent decision-makers, faithfully navigating ordinary shopping experiences. Yet every aisle patiently tells another remarkable story. Grocery stores have always been extraordinary conversations between human nature and thoughtful design. Our preferences influence what appears before us, while what patiently appears before us quietly influences our preferences in return. Perhaps that is why these hidden truths feel so endlessly fascinating. They were never truly about labels, prices, or shelves alone. They quietly reveal something infinitely more extraordinary: the beautiful complexity of being human itself. We are creatures of familiarity, nostalgia, curiosity, and comfort, patiently accompanying our grocery carts through ordinary afternoons without ever realizing how many remarkable stories faithfully surround us. And if something as familiar as a weekly visit to the grocery store can conceal so many hidden truths, patiently waiting in plain sight, then the revelations still waiting ahead promise discoveries more fascinating than ever before, because we have only just begun uncovering the extraordinary stories quietly hiding between America's most familiar shelves. The deeper we venture into America's grocery stores, the more extraordinary their hidden stories become. Perhaps that is because the greatest grocery store lies have never depended upon deception alone. They quietly endure because they feel wonderfully reasonable. The familiar becomes trustworthy. Tradition patiently becomes truth, and eventually, millions of Americans stop asking questions altogether. Yet some of the most fascinating revelations are still patiently waiting among the ordinary routines we have practiced for decades. At number 28 lies the belief that products placed together naturally belong together. Grocery stores rarely arrange their shelves by coincidence. Chips patiently wait beside dips. Pasta quietly accompanies sauces. Cookies faithfully share space with coffee. Human beings have always appreciated thoughtful suggestions, particularly when they feel entirely our own. Sometimes the extraordinary thing about grocery shopping is not what we plan to buy before entering the store, but what quietly accompanied us home alongside it. At number 27 waits one of America's oldest grocery traditions: the belief that familiar brands remain unchanged simply because their labels remain familiar. Previous generations purchased many of the same beloved names, patiently waiting upon today's shelves. Yet time faithfully changes almost everything. Recipes evolve, ingredients quietly change, portions occasionally become smaller, while packages remain comfortingly familiar. Nostalgia itself possesses extraordinary persuasive power. Sometimes we are not merely purchasing a product at all. We are graciously welcoming a treasured memory home once again. And speaking of treasured memories, number 26 reveals something remarkably human: the extraordinary influence of words like homestyle, country, and traditional. Few Americans remain entirely immune to the comfort quietly hidden within these familiar descriptions. History has always cherished handmade traditions, faithfully preserved across generations. Grocery stores understand this beautifully. Occasionally, the most persuasive ingredient, patiently waiting inside a package, is not something we eat altogether. It is the story we are invited to remember. At number 25 lies the fascinating belief that newer automatically means better. New and improved has patiently accompanied American grocery stores for generations. Human beings naturally admire innovation and meaningful progress, yet history quietly reminds us that extraordinary things occasionally endure precisely because they required remarkably little improvement altogether. Curiosity has always asked a more beautiful question: not whether something is new, but whether it remains worthy of our trust. The revelations become increasingly surprising at number 24, the hidden truth behind convenience itself. Modern grocery stores graciously offer extraordinary luxuries unimaginable to previous generations. Pre-cut fruits patiently wait beside ready-made meals and carefully prepared ingredients requiring little more than opening their packages. Convenience remains among modern life's greatest gifts. Yet perhaps one of humanity's oldest hidden truths quietly remains unchanged: that convenience occasionally asks us to surrender something in return. Time, effort, tradition, or simple curiosity have always possessed extraordinary value of their own. At number 23 waits the belief that abundance naturally means freedom of choice. Americans frequently celebrate having more options than ever before. Entire aisles patiently present countless variations of seemingly ordinary products. Curiously enough, however, Human beings occasionally become less certain of their choices when extraordinary abundance quietly replaces thoughtful simplicity. Previous generations faithfully selected from fewer possibilities, while modern shoppers patiently navigate hundreds. More choices do not always make life's ordinary decisions less fascinating. Sometimes they simply make them infinitely more complicated. And if grocery stores understand humanity's remarkable relationship with choice itself, number 22 reveals how powerfully they understand our relationship with time. Few people enter a grocery store intending to spend considerably more than originally planned. Yet ordinary shopping experiences quietly unfold at remarkably thoughtful rhythms. Seasonal displays patiently announce their arrival before we expected them. Familiar products graciously accompany us through unexpected aisles. Grocery shopping has perhaps never been merely about buying food altogether. It quietly became one of America's most extraordinary weekly rituals. At number 21 lies our remarkable trust in beautiful photographs, patiently waiting upon familiar packages. History tells us that human beings have always admired extraordinary craftsmanship and beautiful presentation. There is something wonderfully persuasive about golden pancakes glistening beneath morning sunlight, or perfectly prepared meals patiently inviting us to imagine tomorrow's dinner table. Before we consciously realize it, our expectations have occasionally begun forming remarkable stories entirely their own. The next hidden truth quietly accompanies millions of Americans through grocery stores every single day. Number 20 reveals the belief that shopping habits remain entirely our own creations. Human beings are wonderfully predictable creatures of routine. We faithfully travel familiar paths through familiar aisles, purchasing comfortingly familiar products. Perhaps that is why grocery stores occasionally rearrange themselves so thoughtfully throughout the years. Curiosity patiently follows familiarity wherever it faithfully leads. At number 19 waits one of modern life's greatest misconceptions: the belief that grocery shopping has become simpler with time. Previous generations certainly faced challenges of their own, yet grocery stores themselves were once remarkably different places altogether. Today's shoppers patiently navigate nutritional promises, endless varieties, persuasive descriptions, and beautifully crafted packaging, unlike anything previous generations could have imagined. Grocery shopping quietly became infinitely more sophisticated, while appearing wonderfully ordinary at the same time. At number 18 lies the hidden truth behind America's enduring love affair with healthy-looking foods. Human beings have always admired simplicity and nature's extraordinary beauty. Certain products instinctively feel wholesome before we have ever asked meaningful questions about them. Sometimes appearances faithfully accompany extraordinary truths. At other times, they simply accompany extraordinary assumptions. History has always rewarded those patient enough to look beyond first impressions. And speaking of appearances, number 17 reveals something fascinating about our relationship with grocery store traditions themselves. For decades, Americans have faithfully inherited shopping habits from previous generations without ever consciously recognizing that they were inherited at all. The cereal patiently waiting upon familiar breakfast tables, the beloved holiday traditions quietly preserved across decades, and the ordinary products accompanying childhood memories frequently continue traveling alongside us throughout our remarkable journeys. Grocery stores have never merely sold products. They have faithfully preserved generations of American stories. At number 16 waits the remarkably persuasive power of urgency. While supplies last, limited quantity, today's special. Human beings have always feared watching extraordinary opportunities quietly disappear beyond tomorrow's horizon. Grocery stores understand that curiosity frequently becomes enthusiasm when accompanied by the beautiful illusion that time itself patiently waits for no one. Scarcity possesses extraordinary influence precisely because it quietly transforms ordinary decisions into meaningful moments. And finally, we arrive at number 15, the greatest revelation of this chapter. It is the hidden habit of believing that grocery store lies must always involve false promises altogether. Yet perhaps the most fascinating discoveries waiting throughout America's grocery stores reveal something infinitely more remarkable than that. The greatest grocery store lies are frequently built not upon what is said, but upon what we naturally assume for ourselves. Human beings patiently complete remarkable stories using surprisingly little information. We trust familiarity. We admire tradition. We faithfully preserve meaningful rituals across generations. Grocery stores have quietly accompanied every one of these extraordinary qualities throughout American life itself. Perhaps that is why these hidden truths feel increasingly valuable as our journey continues. They are not merely stories about grocery stores altogether. They are remarkable stories about ourselves, the beautifully human ways we trust, remember, hope, and choose. And if America's most familiar grocery traditions have patiently concealed so many extraordinary revelations already, then the greatest hidden truths of all are still waiting quietly ahead. Because we are now approaching the discoveries millions of Americans continue carrying home every single week without ever realizing the remarkable stories patiently hidden within their shopping carts. The most fascinating hidden truths are seldom the loudest ones. They patiently wait until curiosity has traveled far enough to recognize them for what they have always been. Throughout this remarkable journey, we have discovered that America's grocery stores are not merely places where we purchase food. They are places where generations quietly pass down traditions, assumptions, and beautifully familiar routines. And the revelations waiting before us are perhaps the most extraordinary of them all. At number 14 lies the hidden truth behind farm imagery. For generations, Americans have instinctively trusted images of red barns, wooden fences, rolling fields, and smiling farmers patiently welcoming us home. Few symbols feel more comforting than reminders of America's agricultural heritage. Yet human beings have always responded as much to stories as to facts themselves. Long before we consciously examine what we are purchasing, our minds have already begun imagining simpler times and extraordinary craftsmanship. Grocery stores have quietly understood something remarkable for decades, that familiarity and nostalgia frequently become trusted companions throughout life's ordinary decisions. At number 13 waits one of humanity's most enduring assumptions, the belief that if something has remained popular for decades, it must naturally deserve unquestioning trust. History tells us that traditions possess extraordinary value, but history also reminds us that curiosity has always remained equally valuable. Millions of Americans faithfully welcome the same products into their homes year after year without ever pausing to ask whether familiarity itself has quietly become the reason for their confidence. Sometimes, extraordinary traditions deserve to endure forever. At other times, they quietly invite us to ask thoughtful questions once again. At number 12 lies the remarkable power of placement at the very beginning of our grocery journey. Fresh flowers patiently welcome us through familiar doors. Beautiful displays quietly announce the changing seasons. Comforting aromas faithfully accompany us throughout the first moments of our arrival. Curiously enough, grocery shopping has always begun long before we ever place our first item inside the cart. The modern grocery store patiently introduces itself as an experience before it ever becomes a transaction. And perhaps that is why ordinary grocery shopping occasionally feels so wonderfully timeless altogether. At number 11 waits the hidden truth behind simplicity itself. Human beings naturally admire uncomplicated answers to life's more complicated questions. Healthy, natural, traditional, fresh. Few words quietly carry greater influence throughout America's grocery stores than these familiar companions. Yet perhaps one of life's greatest hidden truths has always been recognizing that extraordinary things are rarely understood through extraordinary simplicity alone. Curiosity has always required us to look just a little further than where our first assumptions patiently ask us to stop. Before we continue toward the documentary's greatest revelations, allow Vintage Verdict to remain a quiet companion for future hidden truths patiently waiting to be discovered together. And now, we arrive at the discoveries millions of Americans continue encountering every single week without ever realizing how extraordinary they truly are. At number 10 lies one of the most remarkable grocery store truths of all: the belief that shopping lists faithfully determine what we purchase. Previous generations certainly prepared thoughtful lists before visiting their neighborhood markets. Yet remarkably few Americans ever leave with precisely what they originally intended to buy. Human beings are wonderfully curious creatures. We discover unexpected comforts patiently waiting beside familiar shelves. Ordinary products quietly become extraordinary possibilities simply because they appeared before us at precisely the right moment. Perhaps grocery stores have never merely fulfilled our expectations altogether. More often, they quietly participate in creating them. At number 9 waits the hidden truth behind America's extraordinary love affair with convenience. History faithfully reminds us that modern grocery stores would have appeared miraculous to previous generations. Fresh produce patiently waits throughout every season. Entire meals quietly prepare themselves in moments rather than hours. Extraordinary conveniences faithfully accompany us throughout nearly every aisle. Yet convenience has always quietly carried stories of its own. Previous generations occasionally sacrificed time in exchange for familiarity and tradition. Modern life frequently offers us the opposite bargain altogether. Neither is inherently more remarkable than the other. They simply remind us that every generation quietly chooses which treasures it values, most faithfully preserving. At number 8 lies one of humanity's oldest habits: the remarkable tendency to trust our first impressions. Grocery stores beautifully understand this extraordinary quality. Labels patiently introduce themselves before ingredients ever have an opportunity to speak. Familiar colors quietly inspire confidence long before curiosity begins asking thoughtful questions. Human beings have always relied upon instinct throughout life's countless ordinary decisions. Yet history repeatedly reveals that some of life's greatest discoveries patiently wait beyond our very first assumptions. Perhaps curiosity itself remains among humanity's greatest lifelong companions, precisely because first impressions occasionally conceal extraordinary hidden truths of their own. At number 7 waits the revelation that grocery stores are quietly among America's greatest storytellers. They faithfully preserve childhood memories, holiday traditions, and remarkable moments graciously shared across generations. Ordinary products patiently become extraordinary symbols of home itself. There is something profoundly beautiful about this hidden truth. Grocery stores have never merely accompanied American families through the decades. They have quietly become part of their stories altogether, and perhaps that is why questioning familiar assumptions has never required us to surrender cherished traditions themselves. Curiosity and nostalgia have always possessed extraordinary abilities to graciously coexist. At number 6 lies one of modern life's most fascinating contradictions: the extraordinary illusion of infinite choice. Today's shoppers patiently navigate thousands upon thousands of possibilities, waiting throughout familiar aisles. Yet human beings continue purchasing remarkably familiar things week after week and generation after generation. Perhaps freedom has never merely been about possessing more choices altogether. More often, it quietly becomes discovering which choices faithfully deserve our thoughtful attention in the first place. At number 5 waits a revelation worthy of every remarkable discovery patiently uncovered throughout this documentary. The greatest grocery store lie has never been any single label, advertisement, or product faithfully waiting upon America's shelves. It is the remarkably common belief that grocery shopping is entirely about products at all. History quietly reveals something infinitely more extraordinary. Grocery stores have always reflected the hopes, traditions, comforts, and beautifully human assumptions faithfully accompanying us throughout everyday life itself. They quietly tell remarkable stories about who we are, what we trust, and which treasures we faithfully choose to carry home alongside us. At number 4 lies the hidden truth that millions of Americans unknowingly practice every single week: the habit of mistaking familiarity for certainty. Human beings naturally trust the things patiently accompanying them throughout life's remarkable journey. There is profound beauty hidden within that truth, yet perhaps curiosity remains equally beautiful, precisely because it occasionally whispers another thoughtful question into otherwise ordinary moments. What have we stopped noticing simply because it has always been there? Grocery stores quietly reward those willing to ask that question. At number 3 waits one of the documentary's greatest revelations: that extraordinary hidden truths rarely hide within extraordinary places altogether. Humanity has always imagined remarkable discoveries patiently waiting beyond distant horizons or concealed within life's greatest mysteries. Yet 42 hidden truths quietly waited for us somewhere infinitely more familiar, between ordinary grocery store shelves, faithfully accompanying generations of American families. The most remarkable discoveries frequently remain hidden in plain sight, precisely because they have become so beautifully ordinary. At number 2 lies the extraordinary realization that curiosity itself may be among humanity's greatest safeguards. Grocery stores have patiently changed throughout every remarkable generation. Products evolved, traditions quietly deepened. Modern conveniences faithfully transformed everyday life altogether. Yet one beautiful truth has remained unchanged throughout history itself. Human beings have always benefited from thoughtfully asking meaningful questions about the ordinary things patiently accompanying them throughout their lives. Curiosity has never been skepticism alone. More often, it quietly becomes gratitude's most faithful companion, a beautiful invitation to appreciate life's extraordinary details more completely than before. And finally, we arrive at number 1, the greatest hidden truth of them all. The biggest grocery store lie Americans continue falling for was never hidden within a particular product, label, or familiar tradition. It was believing that grocery stores simply sell us things. For generations, Americans have faithfully walked through familiar automatic doors, believing they arrived merely to purchase tomorrow's breakfast or tonight's dinner. Yet grocery stores have always quietly offered something infinitely more remarkable than that. They patiently sell comfort hidden within childhood memories. They faithfully preserve traditions graciously passed from one generation to the next. They quietly shape the ordinary decisions accompanying our everyday lives, while simultaneously reflecting the extraordinary people we have patiently become. The hidden truth, waiting patiently at number 1, was never about deception altogether. It was about understanding that every grocery cart quietly tells a remarkable story. A story about what we value, what we remember, what we trust, and perhaps most beautifully of all, what we lovingly choose to bring home. The greatest grocery store lies were never merely printed upon labels, patiently waiting throughout America's supermarket aisles. They have always been hidden within the assumptions we stopped noticing long ago. And perhaps that is why ordinary places continue concealing life's most extraordinary hidden truths. Because sometimes the most remarkable discoveries are not waiting somewhere far beyond tomorrow's horizon. They are patiently waiting exactly where we have been looking all along. Perhaps the most remarkable discovery waiting throughout this journey was not uncovering 42 grocery store lies Americans still fall for. It was realizing that the greatest hidden truths have never belonged exclusively to grocery stores at all. They have always belonged to us. For generations, Americans have faithfully pushed their shopping carts through familiar aisles, carrying something far more valuable than grocery lists. We carry memories patiently preserved across decades. We carry family traditions lovingly passed from one generation to the next. We carry assumptions that have quietly accompanied us for so long that we no longer remember where they began. There is something beautifully human about that. The comforting smell of freshly baked bread waiting beside childhood memories. The familiar label that has patiently occupied the same place at the family table for decades. The extraordinary privilege of preserving traditions that quietly transform ordinary meals into treasured moments graciously shared with the people we love. Grocery stores have always been more than places where we purchase tomorrow's dinner. In many ways, they have become living museums of everyday American life itself. And perhaps that is precisely why curiosity matters so profoundly. Throughout history, wisdom has never required us to become fearful of ordinary things. Quite the opposite. Wisdom patiently teaches us to appreciate them more completely than before. Questioning long-held beliefs has never been an act of distrust altogether. More often, it quietly becomes an extraordinary expression of respect. For ourselves, for the remarkable stories faithfully accompanying us throughout our lives, and for the hidden truths patiently waiting beyond our first assumptions. The revelations waiting throughout this documentary were never invitations to abandon cherished traditions or surrender life's simple pleasures. They were invitations to rediscover something infinitely more valuable: the extraordinary privilege of remaining curious throughout every remarkable season of life. Human beings have always possessed a beautiful tendency to become wonderfully familiar with the things accompanying them each day. Familiarity offers comfort. Tradition faithfully preserves meaning across generations. Yet history quietly reminds us that curiosity remains among humanity's greatest lifelong companions precisely because ordinary things frequently conceal extraordinary stories of their own. Perhaps the greatest hidden truth waiting patiently throughout America's grocery stores is discovering that thoughtful questions are among life's greatest gifts. Why do we trust certain things so completely? What extraordinary stories quietly accompany our everyday choices? Which assumptions have faithfully remained beside us simply because no one ever invited us to look at them differently before? These questions do not diminish life's ordinary treasures, they deepen them, because there remains something profoundly beautiful about walking through familiar grocery store aisles while seeing them with newly curious eyes. The ordinary becomes remarkable once again. Familiar traditions quietly reveal extraordinary dimensions previously hidden in plain sight. The everyday patiently reminds us that wonder itself was never reserved exclusively for life's greatest mysteries. It has always been waiting beside us. And perhaps that is humanity's most extraordinary privilege of all, that we are never too old, too familiar, or too certain to discover something beautiful hiding within the ordinary moments faithfully accompanying our lives. Tomorrow, millions of Americans will once again walk through those familiar automatic doors, carrying grocery lists and cherished memories patiently preserved across generations. The shelves will remain wonderfully familiar. The traditions will faithfully endure. Yet perhaps something beautiful has quietly changed. They may also carry a little more curiosity than before, for the greatest hidden truths have never asked us to fear what we thought we knew. They have only ever invited us to look a little closer. Because wisdom was never found in having all of the answers, it has always begun with asking one more remarkable question.